welcome back to another episode of Choose Courage Inc., where we help creatives, entrepreneurs, and aspiring corporate escape artists break free from the systems that were never built for them and create businesses where people, creativity, and courage come first. I'm Vivianne Castillo, founder of Choose Courage Inc., and this episode is special, not only because it's the last episode of season 3, season 3, y'all. But I also wanted to close it out the way the walkout closed out, with real people in a real room asking the questions that are actually hard to say out loud. So this episode is a recording from the live panel that I just hosted at the walkout, and I was so incredibly lucky and fortunate enough to be joined by 3 people that I deeply admire and respect. All 4 of us have a tech and UX background. All 4 of us at some point made the decision to leave and build something of our own. And all 4 of us showed up to answer the questions that so many people at the walkout had pre-submitted, the folks in this room, questions that many times we were often too scared to ask anywhere else. And so the survey that I had pre-submitted, people didn't hold back. You know, the fears were real. Am I ready? Will I be wasting years of my career? What if I'm being reckless? What do I do when I can't even hear my own signals or my gut anymore? And so that's what we get into. And we go into the nitty-gritty of some conversations that people have been too afraid to have out loud. And so you'll hear us talk about the difference between things like fear that's warning you about a real risk versus fear that's keeping you small. We get into pricing, actually get into it, numbers and all. We also talk about grieving an identity you haven't even lost yet, and what it means to carry the weight of your family's sacrifices into a decision like this. And you'll hear something toward the end that I'm not going to spoil, but it's the kind of thing that might just make you more open to possibility. So if you've ever felt stuck between who corporate told you to be and who you actually are, then this one's for you. Season 4 will start in July, but first, let's close out season 3 the right way and let's get into it. All right, y'all, let's get it. Yo, cooking. I'm here for it. I'm going to warm us up with a question, and then group, I'm going to have us work through 3 buckets of topics, we'll call them. The first bucket is around worth and identity. So things around, were you actually ever ready? How do you think about the previous years you've invested in one career before making a switch into something else? Things like that. The second bucket will be around the people around you. So thinking about the weight of stability that a lot of us carry, fear of being seen as a failure, all of these things. And then we'll close with a bucket that I'm going to call the practical fears. So talking about, of course, money, talking about, okay, how do you think about this? Do you quit first? Do you build first? What's kind of like the process in order? What that experience has been like for all of us. And then I'm going to leave room for just live Q&A for us to chop it up. So maybe just to warm us up a little bit, this one question came back often, actually, and when people pre-submitted their questions. The title of the session is, the questions you're afraid to ask. And the survey made very clear how much fear can be in this room. So what I noticed was that people are scared that they're not ready, scared of losing stability, scared that they're being reckless. So maybe let's start with the most honest version of this question. Curious about who wants to go first, but how do you tell the difference between fear that's warning you about a real risk, starting a new business, betting on yourself, whatever it is, versus fear that's just keeping you small? And is there ever an honest version of the answer that's not yet, or even maybe I'll just stay?
I'll break the ice and then we can kind of popcorn around. Um, there's a diagram that floats around about people being stuck, and it's like, oh, what's in your way? And it's like, I'm scared. And you're like, okay, do it scared. I think about that a lot because so much of I think all of our journeys probably has been doing something for the first time. And a lot of times when you do something for the first time, it's uncomfortable, it's different. But that's different from being concerned about known risks, right? And so I think a lot of the difference between like, oh, I'm scared because this is new and I'm scared because this could be damaging is, have you spent time thinking about what could go wrong and like kind of worked through mitigating those things? And so a lot of times when I find myself scared or stuck, I'm like, what am I worried about? And I name that thing and then I'm like, okay, what's the chance of that happening? And if it happens, what does that look like? And can I recover from it? Or how do I prevent those things or even pay attention to signals that maybe we're approaching that? And that often helps me be like, oh no, I'm not actually worried about something. This is just uncomfortable and different and new. And I need to, lean in and make a choice to go do that thing scared.
Oh yeah. I like that because I feel like fear that's warning you gets almost like more specific when you look at it, right? Like you can
Totally.
itemize it. So if you're like, all right, I have 4 months of runway, or I have no pipeline and a mortgage, or my kid has medical needs and our coverage is tied to this job, like that fear points at something and hands you a list, but you can do something with that list.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of times people get stuck with the list of the things and then they're like, okay, well, what do I want to do about this list?
Or they make the list and they don't ask themselves, how likely is this thing? And if this happens, you're like, okay, let's say I'm trying to come, I want to put together a workshop. And it's like, what if no one signs up? And you're like, okay, I can handle that, right? What if there's a weather catastrophe and like we have to move, like you can work through all of those things once you've named them, but you have to name them and then do something about it, right? Not just like make this overwhelming list of things that can go wrong because tons of stuff can happen every day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think something that I'm hearing and what both of you have said so far is I'm thinking of like fear as information. And so sometimes sometimes for me, it hasn't actually been fear. It's more like nervousness or it's worry. I can think of some very explicit times where I was just like fearful to make a very big, what felt like a what was a life changing decision to like leave an institution. And I can name two specific times. One was in May of 2021, and then the other time was in April of last year. So one was leaving like a dream job in design in higher education, and I had nothing lined up. I had no consulting lined up. I had no other job. I had no prospects. It was like I have to get out. Like the worry had manifested into really a fear of knowing that if I stayed, that was going to be way worse than any possible unknown. And then the other time was last year working in the federal government. So again, in a design role, and there was just enough that had manifested to a point where like I could no longer stay working in this environment because it was so grossly misaligned with the values. So for me, I see this it's kind of like this winding road of like fear, worry, nervousness. And I think nervousness is a much bigger one for me. I'm curious about you, Vincent.
Yeah, no, I love that, your examples and definitely have experienced that. I would also, for me, say that one thing that sticks in my mind when I think about this is a time in 2020, and I think that it's relevant because, if we can recall, it's only been 6 years ago, but we're still feeling the residual of, being in a pandemic and I made the wonderful decision to leave my position during that time where the world just seems it was at a time where it was very ambiguous. We weren't really certain about what was up and what was down, right? And there was just a lot going on. And, it was a time where I think many people were trying to hold on to some sense of normalcy as much as possible, some sense of security. And for me, what I recognized during that time, why I made the leap and I jumped during that time was because it felt too safe for me. I felt like I wasn't growing enough. I needed to be in a position where I allowed myself to explore more of who I was, what I had to offer into this space as a designer, as someone who's a creative problem solver. So I asked myself the question, what is it that I have not allowed myself to do and how I want to show up in the world. And so I gave myself that permission to show up in the world, even when things were kind of out of control. And so for me, it was more so asking and answering the question of what am I holding myself back from, that allowed for me to make that decision despite being fearful as well.
Yeah, it makes me think of there's two stories that come to mind about when I decided to leave corporate to pursue humanity-centered full-time. Now, I was building humanity-centered in the spring of 2020 and also working full-time at Salesforce. So it was just I was working a lot. And there was two conversations. One was actually with Behzod. Behzod, I don't know if you remember this, but Behzod had left I think maybe like 4 or 5 months before me. And I remember being on this walk and just kind of talking to him. And he was like encouraging me to, hey, like you should like go out and like bet on yourself, like you could do it. And he was like, and if it doesn't work, you could always go back. And he's like, but I feel like you won't want to go back. And I was like, yeah, like once you, this is why a lot of people I talk to, they're afraid of taking short-term leave because they're like, I'm gonna be away from the toxicity enough to know that I can't endure it anymore. And so that was like a really important distinction. And the other was I was talking to a friend of mine and I was like, well, if I leave, I would be leaving like a good salary. I had a good, reputation in the company. I was only there for 2 years, but I was on like a texting, FaceTiming basis with the chief people officer, some other executives. Like I was in like the ideal situation. And I was like, I would be leaving something secure for something that like isn't secure and known. And my friend was like, yeah, but that's a false sense of security because they could fire you tomorrow and not think twice about it. And she's like, I think you just need to get more clear on what is your enough. Like, what are your numbers? Like, actually do the math, not the, sit and eat ramen noodles every day kind of math, but like, what do you actually need? And for me, and again, it'll be different for everyone, but when I did that math, I realized I was actually making more than what I needed. But what that did was it gave me the emotional cushion to like think and dream and like build. Um, but yeah, that's what comes up for me.
I, I like how you talk about making that concrete. I mean, I definitely remember that walk and those conversations. But I think one of the things you're differentiating, which is really helpful, is and Vincent, I liked your like I know that I have more to offer perspective because there's a difference between uncertainty and risk. Like there is things I can't know, and there's things that I just like haven't thought about enough. Like they can be known, I just haven't done the work. And I think that's a really helpful like both for yourself and for the situation of like, do I want to do this? Is this exciting to me? Like, let me spend time thinking about what that possible future could look like. And then let me get really brass tacks. Like, is like, what could that look like in the world? Is there an opportunity to build a vehicle or business or whatever that like, but those are sort of different things. And I think we often conflate them because when we start this journey, it feels like this overwhelming, like you're running from something, not running towards something else. And like you need to spend time thinking about what it is that you're running toward in more concrete detail so that you can like start to interrogate some of these things like what are my numbers or what could this look like instead of just like, oh, I don't want to be here.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit what we were talking about yesterday of like regulate first, then strategize. Because like a lot of times when we encounter things that are beyond us or things that we haven't done yet, like our nervous system gets agitated. And the thing about, especially in like the times that we're in right now, new agitations agitate old ones, right? So for some of you, even like in the last couple days, you're hearing these different talks, you're hearing things Rachel's saying, different perspectives, and you're probably feeling like a sense of like tightness in your chest, but also excitement, right? And part of that is just your body like recalibrating itself to possibility. In corporate, when you get too close to possibility, you might get your hand slapped. You might get in trouble, right? You might have to shrink yourself so you can survive. So part of it is also just like a recalibration of how you're relating to that. Rachel, I see you pondering over there.
I'm just like, I like there are like key words that everyone's saying that I don't want to lose track of. So like just like this this aspect of like what Vincent said, like giving yourself permission, like what am I holding myself back from? Like this, and then you just mentioning possibility. I feel like there's I feel like there's going to be more to come that will unfold with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I
Yeah.
think, oh, go on, Vincent.
Oh no, speaking of words, I love the word that you brought up, emotional cushion. I think that that's just that's something that I'm pretty sure will also come back as well. But it resonated with me, and one of the things that as I was listening to you share more, that came to mind about this idea of fear is that I recognize that in that moment of making the decision, as I was identifying the different things that were causing me to be hesitant, I recognized that I was also making excuses to justify the fear, right? So
Mm,
it was, oh, well, I won't have enough money to pay for this. Although yes, that was partially real, but it wasn't, because it was, to your point, I had enough. I had more than enough, right? But in my mind, I jumped to the extreme to justify that I should be fearful of this thing, therefore I should not move. And I think that that's going to show up for everyone, and being very honest about, is this a justifiable excuse, or is this one to validate the fear and the feeling of the fear that you have? And I think those are different as well.
yeah, there's a question of like, was there this final event that kind of like solidified things in your mind? I'd be curious to hear from a couple of you as well. For me, I had taken short-term leave at the end of 2020 because I felt like I was losing myself. Like I just felt, you know, that feeling when you're like, I feel so untethered. That's the only way I can like describe it. But that's where I was at. And it was 2 weeks before I was supposed to go back to Salesforce, and I was watching the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. For those of you who haven't seen this movie is about Fred Hampton. He's the leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago, and it's about how the Chicago police and the CIA worked to assassinate him because he was like bringing together change for justice and all these things. Anyways, there's this scene in the beginning, and it's a bunch of Black Chicagoans, and they're celebrating and they're super excited that they're about to name this community college after Malcolm X. And Fred Hampton gets up and he's like, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. You think that's going to make you free? I just had this moment where I was like, yo, I'm not free. We're going to give you this little raise. You think that's going to make you free? We're going to give you this little employee resource group. You think that's going to make you free? We're gonna give you this little title. You think that's gonna make you free? And I was like, I'm not free. And then I made the mistake of watching the movie Soul, the Pixar movie, which is like 100% for adults, not kids. And though that was like the moment where I was like, I just can't endure this anymore. I was like, I at least have to try. So yeah, that was my moment for me.
Just echoing that, yes, Soul is so not for kids, very much for adults. Like so many of those other like recent movies and over the past several years. I think there are two moments that are coming up for me, and I'll share the one that was probably more recent. So this is again like working in the federal government, which might not feel like an example of like leaving corporate, but so many technologists and designers that in at least over the past decade-ish that work in the federal government came from corporate environments. Many of them brought the worst of those corporate environments into the federal government, which I swear is part of the reason why we're experiencing so much of what we're experiencing now. And I think for me, you know, I was in a role. I was a design supervisor with a team called U.S. Digital Core, like literally one of those dream job opportunities. Like I am over like training and leadership and mentoring like early career designers and data scientists. And I could not have started at the worst possible time because I had like I think 2 weeks of bliss, and then there was the inauguration in January of 2025, and then everything just really fell apart day one. And I thought I could kind of like suffer through it, and I thought, you know, I'm a social worker, I've got a strong will, I know exactly where my values, my principles are, like they will just be unwavering, and I will be on such strong personal and professional ground. And then there was just this very consistent like chipping away at that. And for anyone else who might have worked in either government or just kind of following the story of what was happening at that federal level, it was, I mean, it was just a daily barrage of attack on federal employees, on designers, on technologists. And I'm not sure what, I mean, there was so much, but there was a moment around my birthday in late March where I just thought like, my heart is so tired. Like I had the stamina to do this and to kind of tackle it, but like I was just, I could just feel myself getting sadder and sadder with each passing day. And I haven't really felt that way professionally, really ever, like that kind of like real tension. And there was just a moment where I thought, I don't have to stay. And it's like I needed to take a couple of days off and literally like leave home. Like we traveled up to Michigan. I live in Illinois. We traveled up to Michigan. So it just like that physical separation from like my home office really gave me that momentary clarity to just be like, I can leave. I don't have to stay. Like I don't have to prove anyone that I am strong. Like I can prove to my daughter and to myself, myself, that I am making a choice to not participate and be complicit in this system. So, sometimes it's like a culmination of like a bunch of little moments that can lead up to like that main decision.
Yeah, I love that.
I feel like my experience with Slack was very similar in that like I had a job that I loved. I was working with a manager who I'd worked with at Facebook and like basically followed to Slack. And I think I'd been there about a year and a half, year and some change. And like I had moved really close to the office. I basically would like spend my mornings in San Francisco. I'd like go biking with my friends, come home, make coffee with my girlfriend. We would walk like 5 blocks to Slack. We both worked there. And then I would get in the elevator and just like be sad. And I was like, something here is wrong. And so I started working with a coach because I was trying to figure out like, do I not like this role? Am I not excited about Slack? Am I not excited about this role at Slack? And it was really like this sort of just peeling back the layers over and over again to be like, why did I come here? What has changed? What am I excited about? And like me almost making a map of myself to figure out not just what's wrong, but like where do I want to go with this? Because I think I knew something. You feel like that anxiety or that tension, and you're like, I need something different. But when you don't know what different is, it feels very overwhelming. And I think having someone to like shepherd me through that was really helpful.
I think that's a really good transition into what I want to surface is the single most common fear that was named in the survey. And it was essentially some version of I'm not ready or I'm not skilled enough. And I think underneath that, people describe two different things. Some have like a clear plan and just can't make themselves move. Like one person said they built the whole product, they just need to have the gut to leap. Others said something maybe a little bit more quieter and scarier. One person said that they used to feel the next step in their whole body, and now they feel nothing at all when they picture the future. And so honestly, I'm just curious from y'all, like, were you ready when you left? And what do you do when you feel like you can't even hear your own signal anymore, in case you experience that?
You know, I would say I was not ready. Every time that I left, because I did this a couple times, for different reasons in different parts of my journey. But every time I thought after the first time that I would be ready. That was a lie, full on lie. I was I was just not ready. What I was able to recognize though is that I think one of the things that I want to bring from the last conversation into this one is, also this identifying that I was tired and I just needed a break to recalibrate, right? And so, because it's very difficult to make such a change when you are so depleted, when you are burnt out, and I know a couple people were mentioning that in the chat as well. And so, it may there's that component to the not feeling ready. And once you give yourself that break and take a vacation with your family, Rachel, as you were mentioning, you know, I think coming back and then, you know, recognizing that I got my win back, and then being able to, you know, ask yourself the question, you know, what does this look like, and some of the things that we mentioned before. But for me, I was never ready. And it was still, it leads also into the imposter syndrome, which, you know, which is something that for me has not gone away. It just morphs and shifts into different ways, because as I continue to grow and as I continue to venture into spaces unknown, because it is unknown to me, I'm not going to feel completely ready and capable to being my full self, because I want to know more of what exists in the space. And because I don't feel ready. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. That just means that there is a way in which I have to approach the situation where I can learn while doing, instead of learning before, or spending all of my time trying to get all the things that I need in order to feel comfortable entering into the space. And that moment of comfortability before making that decision may not ever come. And that had to be a question, I mean, an answer in a statement that I had to make to myself, in still making that leap. So again, for me, I was never ready, but I'm okay with not being ready, because I recognize that for me, it's more about understanding the fact that I'm venturing into a space of unknown, and not out of lack of confidence or lack of preparation, because I'm prepared. I just don't know. So now I just need to do so that I can know. If that makes sense.
Something that that is definitely coming up for me. So when I think about my 2021 situation, so emotionally ready, psychologically ready, physically ready, 100% yes. Financially, no. Again, because I had nothing lined up, but I was emotionally, psychologically, and physically ready, because I had been driven to such a high degree of stress that I was getting so physically sick that I needed a surgery in March of 2021 that allowed me to take 6 weeks of FMLA. And so it's like, I look back and I think that as much as the true worry of financial instability was present, the hindsight of looking back and realizing that having that emotional readiness, psychological readiness, and honestly, like the physical readiness, that is what gave me that's what gave me the strength to say there is a true risk to staying here than to leaving, and again, like leaving into that unknown. So, I mean, I know we've kind of put some of this in the chat, like these different degrees and these different shades of readiness. So I definitely would encourage folks to think about ready in these different dimensions.
Something that Vincent said that I think really resonates is like, so much of this has to come from within, especially in the beginning. And it's very fractal. Like, you will continue. I think all of us have run into new situations where, like, even if you feel like some part of the business or some part of the work is like you've got it dialed in or you feel good about it, you run into a new situation, you're like, oh, well, here's a new situation that I like haven't encountered before. And I feel like for me, and I'm curious, Vincent, if this feels like the same in what you're saying, it's like you almost develop this, your internal feelings of like strength and competence and confidence. You're like, I know that I have things to offer, and I'm like gonna just bring those things into this environment. I feel like, Vivianne, we've had this conversation about conference talks a lot, where like I feel like when I started giving conference talks, there was this belief that you had to proclaim some grand truth or like share some whatever. And now I think about giving talks a lot more like being a tuning fork. Like, I'm gonna share something that feels true to me, and if it resonates with you, awesome. Let's talk about it. We will follow up, whatever. If it doesn't resonate, no harm, no foul. Like, I'm just talking about things that are true for me. And I think bringing that energy of like, you know, it's less like there is an objective starting line of like you are going to be ready, and it's more like, are you willing to show up? And it's almost just this like getting to the place where you feel excited about how you can show up in a certain venue or vehicle or whatever, and like that is mostly internal confidence.
Yeah, and I feel like as I'm hearing y'all speak, I felt like I was ready enough, but 30 days in, I didn't feel ready. And here's what happened. I think in the beginning, I left and I was like, I'm free. I made it. I did it. I'm leaving. And then 30 days in, I started to remember. The thing about trauma is sometimes your mind and your body will suppress memories, symptoms of it until it feels like you're safe enough to process it. So for me, about 30 days in, I started to remember all of the things that I endured, the things that were said, the things I had to kind of just like stuff down so I could just grit my way through corporate. And so 30 days, I would say that 30 to like 60-day mark was like a really tough spot for me. I was really struggling with a lot of like doubt and fear because I was just processing a lot of things that I hadn't given myself space to process before. I see this happen a lot with my clients. They'll leave, and usually between day 30 and 60, they start to have this kind of like emotional freak out at some point. And part of it is just your body recognizing that it's safe enough to actually work through and acknowledge some of those things. And for me, what pulled me out of it was really just a friend reminding me that, like, hey, this is your business and you can design it in your life any way you want. Because a lot of the things that were coming up were the memories or the experiences I had in corporate that were forcing me to be smaller than who I am and what I was meant to be. And so, like, just having, again, like, entrepreneurship, a lot of people treat it as a solo journey, but it was always meant to be a shared one. So being able to have people in my life who could like tether me back and like bring me back to the reality of the vision of what I was working on was everything. And ended up saving me. I'm seeing a lot of questions here though about one of the main topics here people are curious about, which is that of money. Um, you know, just a little thing. And so something that people are kind of curious about, and just for context, so myself, Rachel and Behzod are more service-based. While we all have product-based experiences, like our businesses are mainly service-based, and Vincent is product-based, okay? And I think a lot of people are kind of curious about like how did you wrestle through some of these initial moments of asking for money, of pricing your services? What were some of the things that you had to kind of work through and grapple through in order to get past maybe some of that fear and anxiety that kicked up for you? We'd love to hear from everyone, just since because the three of us have very different audiences and different things that we're doing. Hmm.
I thought Vincent was going to unmute, so I was going to give him
I was, I
go
was,
for it, please,
you
please.
know, so before starting this company, my previous company was service-based. And I bring that up because I brought with me the same type of thinking that I've applied to this company. And so that thinking was recognizing that, well, first of all, let me to be transparent with you, and this may resonate with some of you, that whenever I thought of a salesperson, I always had this idea of like the car salesman and, you know, somebody who is kind of like shady and not really telling you the full truth and all of that. And so I never wanted to be seen as this sort of like sleazy salesperson. I'm not saying that every car person is a sleazy. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that there was a visual that I had that I did not want to be associated with when it came to talking about my rates and talking about what it costs for me to do a particular thing. And so that kept me stuck because I was associating sort of myself and my ability, my value to this idea of what it means to sell until I realized something really interesting. And that was I've always been selling at the job, even when I was at my position, because if I ever wanted to move from a mid-level position to a higher level, I had to sell myself. I had to sell myself in a way so that my manager would see the value in me to then want to give me the promotion. And I didn't see it that way, obviously, at the time. But then I recognized because I started to break down like what is it about the selling that I don't like, right? And it was oh, I have to pitch myself, or I have to talk about what it is that I can bring to the table. And I was like, well, I was always doing that in some regards. And so I really had to shift the way in which the narrative that I created about what it means to actually sell, and then what it means to put a monetary amount. And so the part that I brought with me was from my previous company to this one, is that I also looked at what is the industry rate, what is the industry rate as it relates to the services and the product that I'm providing, right? That became sort of the foundation, and I did that because it was based on the expectations of my users and the people that my customers, those who I'm going to be selling to. It wasn't, I was setting this amount not because it was attributed to what I can bring as a foundation. It was based on the expectations, because I have to meet people where they were, right? And then once I had that value, that foundation value set, then over time I can start to increase as it relates to my proven value or my proven impact, right? And what it was that I was able to produce, and not necessarily, again, what I am worth, because quite frankly, nobody can afford what I'm actually worth. And that's true for all of you, all of us, really, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of experience and value that we bring because of our knowledge, how we think, how we assess, how we show up in the world. And so I had to decouple those things, and I had to really look at the expectations, the actuality of the work that I was producing, and then seeing the impact and having people share with me their experience, and then being able to increase over time as it relates to both the services that I was providing, and then for the product, it really is what is the industry rate for this? What is the expectation, right? And then as I continue to build, I will continue to adjust my pricing for my product as the market sees fit. But I will never associate myself and my value with the monetary amount that I attach to my business, because those two things don't necessarily align.
Dropping bars. I know, like, I'll say, so humanity centered, consulting based business. There's a couple things I think helped me to work through pricing. One was just having friends that I could just be honest and talk with about numbers. Even to this day, there are still, like, Behzod's one of these friends where we'll talk to each other about, hey, here's how we're thinking about things or how we're structuring certain stuff. And it's nice to just be able to bounce those ideas off of someone, but also to have someone like celebrate when you do well. And it just shifts your relationship with money a little differently. So I think that has been really important. And then because I was at Salesforce and I was working a lot with executives, working a lot with some of our clients, I did have this understanding that there were these written and unwritten rules of how business is done. That there is truly like money everywhere. Like one example was I had a manager at Salesforce who didn't want to support my growth and didn't want to like find budget for me to have coaching internally. And I had a really good relationship with an executive, with the chief people officer at the time, and had a meeting with him. Hey, here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. And I would really love some coaching. This man found budget somewhere and like got me the coach. And that was like a moment where I was like, okay, there are these written on, like there is money like everywhere. And so initially I'm just gonna be safe space, right? I'm gonna be very candid about how I thought about my pricing for some of my like bigger consulting projects. I would ask myself three questions. And again, safe space. I would ask myself, what would some white mediocre man charge for this, who is 100% unqualified, but would 100% get paid for? What would Accenture and McKinsey charge for this, even though they're just having some like 22-year-old out of college just follow some deck and they would 100% get paid for? And then what do I think it's worth? From there, I would add about 10%, and then it's a negotiation from there. So, being able to think like that allowed me to do deals. I think our largest deal was 475K, done a 275K deal, done a 125K deal. And a lot of that comes from just putting numbers out there and recognizing that if they say no, it would have been the exact same answer if I would have just stayed silent. And I think from that, I learned a little bit in terms of how people think about some of these internal talks and workshops and consulting. And I even like had like a hard lesson where there was a panel I was invited to speak on. I think it was HubSpot. And at the time, I would charge people maybe like 7K for a panel. And before I even said my number, they're like, yeah, just send us an invoice for 15K. I was like, yeah, yeah, of course, sure. And I've also have said prices where people said yes, like super quick. And I'm like, ooh, that means I definitely underpriced this. So you kind of learn by just putting yourself out there. And in doing so, and this is why I believe entrepreneurship is a healing experience, you also have to confront your own issues and fears with money. I'm in a much better relationship and place with money today than I was in the beginning of my business. And that comes from, well, maybe call it like exposure therapy, right? Of being put into places and situations that cause me to challenge old stories or experiences that I've had before.
I love all of that. And you and I have had so many good talks about money and pricing. I think like I've a bunch of like responses to things people said. So I'm gonna try to rip through some of this. Um, there's a lot of different definitions of selling, and what Vincent was saying about like becoming good at selling is very real. I love like the To Sell is Human is a great book. The definition I really like is that sales is a transfer of enthusiasm. And so the time where selling feels bad is when you are trying to get someone excited about something that they shouldn't be excited about. And that's what feels sleazy. But I think about even like when I was running ops, like research ops at Slack, when vendors would get on a call and they had a product I needed, I was super happy to be sold to. I was like, tell me why this is going to solve my problem. Cool, I will sign the check. If you were pitching something that I do not want to be excited about, it doesn't like, no good. Um, but when it comes to pricing, and Vivianne, I think you were talking about this really well, like pricing is a value discovery exercise. And so the thing that I think a lot of us struggle with is when you start a business and you start naming a price, especially I'll speak from a service perspective, like when I work in a job, I have a different economic configuration. I am making a single deal with the company to show up for a paycheck. And there's a bunch of stuff I do. I can give talks, I give workshops, I do work, or whatever. Those are all bundled in a single contract that I have made with a company. Now when I make a deal, if like someone's inviting me to give a talk or do a workshop or come do embedded consulting, those are all very different economic arrangements. And what I have to do is think about what is the value of this work to that company? And like, if this goes well, what is the impact to them as a business? And if I am charging less than that, this should be a very easy conversation about price. So like a couple weeks ago, I went and I gave a talk for a company, and I think about it in terms of like my opportunity cost and like how much time I'm going to spend on the talk and can it be reused and all this stuff. And I got invited and I was like, yeah, I think this is probably like, I threw out, I was like 10K. And for me, it was like, if they're going to say yes, then cool, that's worth it for me that I can go and give this talk. No one, like when I was at Facebook or Slack, no one was paying me $10,000 to like give an internal talk. But that was bundled in all of the other things that I got paid, salary, equity, benefit, whatever. And so I think the perception part here is just understanding that you are now accountable to all of these different line items in the business or these different opportunities versus a single thing that you are paying for. Um, the last thing I'll say about like selling generally, I have a policy where like everyone gets a free meeting, and I think about a lot of my client relationships because I don't work with a lot of clients at any one time as sort of dating. And so for me, I don't typically sell or pitch until like this like meeting 2.5. I'll take a meeting, we'll have a conversation, one of three things happens. I solve their problem, I'm not a good fit, or I give them good feedback and they want to talk again. When we have that second meeting, we'll get a sense of like, okay, did they do their homework? Did they do anything? Are these questions good? Am I excited to keep talking with them? Like, back and forth. And then typically between that meeting and the next meeting, they'll be like, hey, this has been great. How can we spend more time together? And at that point, I have much clearer sense of what it could look like to work with them, how I want to support them, what I think is interesting. And I can propose, hey, I would love to XYZ at this price, or here are a set of options. And they have enough context from us working together that they can sort of either counter or be like, yeah, this sounds great. And so I think for me, it's shifted that sales process to be more of like, what's the relationship and the shape that I want to have with these people, whether it's an individual that I'm coaching, a business I'm working with, talk, workshop, et cetera. Because I think a lot of people come in and they try to close on that first sale. They're like, oh, here's this menu of things that I do, and like pick from the menu. And that never really worked for me or like felt true to how I wanted to operate. And so I just started building my way to a different approach.
I find anytime there is a conversation on pricing and money, absolutely fascinating. And I learn something every single time. So I'm sitting here and I'm glad I'm going last because I have probably worked, well, I might be the only one who hasn't worked explicitly in a corporate environment because I never have. I've worked with a lot of people who have worked in those environments. So there's a different kind of residue that I think I have on me from that. But I wonder, and as I sit here, I'm like, I can feel my heart racing a little bit in sort of like good and nervous and learning ways, because just hearing about these things, I feel like again builds these muscles of thinking about these things, practicing what practicing that discernment of what are the types of things that you are doing that you want to do, and where do any of these bits and pieces like actually apply to your situation. So I'll share a couple things. One, I fumbled the ball like just horribly my first year of doing consulting. Like I truly had no idea what I was doing. What I knew what I was doing. I felt very confident about what I knew. I had no idea how to price things. So much of that was coming from a social work mindset, working in a profession that has just been historically undervalued, underpaid, and then also having just been in higher ed, so I think it lots of questions and swirl around, like, you should be grateful for what you're making, you should be grateful for this job, like all of that just nonsense that had to really get just discarded and deprogrammed for me. But I think, but a thing that I want, that as I was thinking about this question, because this question always comes up in almost anything that Vivianne does. So I always like think about, well, what is a story that would be helpful for talking about this? And I remember back in, I think 2021 or 2022, talking with someone who is a pretty well-known coach in UX. And she was asking me, Rachel, what do you charge? And I said, well, and I've just hemmed and hawed because again, I was in the middle of like having no idea what I was really doing when it came to pricing. And but I do think I said like, well, I feel like I should charge what I'm pretty sure like my peers who are doing therapy would probably be earning, which at that time is in like this $110 to $150 an hour range. Some of you might be thinking like, oh my God, Rachel, like what is wrong with you? But again, this is where my mindset was. She laughed at me. And she's like, oh my gosh, she's like, I don't even have your experience or your credentials, and I would charge at least 5 or 6 times that. And like, and I don't even know like what you are absolutely capable of. And so one might think that I would be like empowered by that or feel validated or like, oh wow, like I really should like increase my prices. But ultimately, what it really did was just like infuriate me. It made me realize like, oh my God, like there is like, I am coming from a place where I have never gotten any kind of like experience on this or training on this or coaching or guidance. Like I'm literally kind of like finding my way in the dark and trying to figure this out. And so it led me to putting, and I'll put this in the chat, but it led me to really thinking about what does it mean to have a values-based pricing model. And, I think all of us probably have that, a shape of that in different ways, but there's a piece of this that I added to my website. And I said, a note about historical undervaluation. As a licensed clinical social worker and designer, Rachel's work is informed by years of training, education, applied practice, and lived experience at the intersections of care, equity, and design. Historically, social workers have been underpaid and undervalued despite the critical expertise we bring to creating meaningful, sustainable change. Our pricing reflects a commitment to fair compensation for this often overlooked labor while ensuring accessibility for organizations working toward social good. And I have that on there, like both for like, just it's out there publicly, but it's a reminder to me to like, Rachel, like practice what you flip and preach, like adhere to this. And it's okay for this to like take on different shapes at different times. But if we don't say some of these things either to ourselves or to someone who is part of our peer community or a coach or a friend or a therapist, then it just sort of like, it can be very easily forgotten. And so because I have this on my website, it's like, I'm not going to forget this. There might be things that I tweak or update with this, but it's there. And if you are finding me because you went to my website, you know this. And so when it comes up, I feel that inner emotional strength to not waver on it.
I love that. I was seeing all the love as you were sharing about that. And I think even too, for those of you, because I often hear people they're like, well, what if someone can't like afford to work with me and like all of these things? So one model that I took, even with Humanity Centered, was, we had a B2C and a B2C and a B2B model. And on the B2B side, we weren't cheap. And part of it was because we were dealing a lot with organizational trauma, a lot of like hard nitty gritty things that only the folks with my skill set and Alba's skill set could do. And in doing so, in terms of having those contracts, then we were able to have more affordable B2C options. So for me, it's more of like a business design problem. If you're like, hey, I want to help more people have more access to what I do, then all right, let's think about how do we creatively do that, right? So even with Humanity Centered, we used to have this half day event. And one of the things that we would do is it was a low ticket event, but we would allow people to sponsor someone else's ticket, right? We would donate 20% of what we made to a nonprofit or to a group. There's ways that we can be creative about money without falling into the trap of needing to hoard it. And that's why I think a lot of times, you'll see these companies champion innovation over creativity because creativity requires you to be something that capitalism can't metabolize. It requires you to be more messy, to care about rest, to prioritize people, right? Whereas innovation can just slice out that human piece because it's all about, maximizing profits. And so a part of this too is like with that experimenting, it's becoming creative with the different ways and models of how you could do business.
The, I love that. The thing I want to like double down on that I think you did well with Humanity Centered and Rachel was pointing at is um, we often think that we can deliver like the same service for any person is worth the same. And I think Vivian, you and I talked about this, like I love this metaphor of a bottle of water, where like at a grocery store, a bottle of water is like, let's call it $1. And at a gas station, a bottle of water might be like $3. And at a concert, a bottle of water is like $10. And it's the same bottle of water. It's just in a different scenario. There is a different market dynamic. There's different demand, there's different constraints, there's different supply. And so like you want to be concert water, right? Like you want to go to the places where people are going to pay for the thing you're doing, not in an exploitative way, not like, I'm not saying this in terms of like maximize, but be thoughtful about what you are selling and to what extent that is differentiated or perceived as valuable in those environments. And it doesn't mean you charge less, it means you think about who your audience is.
Yeah, exactly. I want to shift a little bit because one thing I noticed in the pre-event survey was that a lot of people are grieving something they have not even lost yet. So there was like people were saying things like, "Hey, I've spent so many years building this design career. Doesn't leaving mean that I'm wasting all of it?" Or things like, "Who am I if I am not X some big company, right?" And how do you think about the years and the identity you've built inside of previous companies or with other employers? How do you build a sense of self that's not on loan from another institution? Curious about how y'all have been or did think about that. I will start by saying this. I did see, and I wish I knew who this was on LinkedIn, but in their LinkedIn profile, they said, I don't put X's in my bio. And I was like, I love this. I love this for you. But I think especially there's something very unique about the UX industry, tech community specifically. Maybe it's because a lot of us were drawn to these industries because of the ideals around said values of caring about people and empathy. And so now we conflate it of like, well, I'm a good person because I am involved in this role. I am doing this work. And so if I leave it, who am I then? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of titles and identity are tied to like legibility, especially for other people. And the what Vincent was describing earlier about like feeling confident going into a room. One of my favorite books is Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse, and he like basically distinguishes between finite games, which are like games that you play to win, like soccer, football, for those of you, and infinite games, which are games that are just meant to be played. And like, there's a bunch of differences he draws, but he talks about how finite games give you power because you won the game, and infinite games are about strength. Like, do you have skills and abilities to play? And I feel like the thing that's been the most helpful, which maybe is counterproductive and or counterintuitive and having hear pushback from folks, but is sort of to kill your ego and like your identity. I found for me the most helpful thing is actually not trying to be legible to other people or not trying to like have an easy way to explain what I do because the value that I provide in different situations is going to be very different. And so I've used dozens of different ways to explain my work. Me as a service is kind of like my cheat code for being like, I'm just me professionally, which is like a non-answer in a lot of ways, but invites more conversations. And I think for me, it was like, I have so many different skills throughout all of the jobs that I worked. I think back to like my first job was cleaning bathrooms and bagging groceries. And I think that taught me a ton about customer service and helping people that like doesn't show up in any type. Like I think it was on it might still be on my LinkedIn for a while, but like being a janitor was great in ways that like affect how I show up, but as a title doesn't necessarily tell you anything. In the same way that I'm sure a lot of us have worked with people who have titles that they don't deserve or describe very different jobs. And I think once you get there, it's more about what is it that you want to offer and how do you want to show up and what skills do you have that you're bringing into the work more than like what you call yourself or how you make yourself legible to other people.
Yeah, because I think your bio right now on LinkedIn, your like header is dark arts and metaphors. People are like, what is that? And you're like, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
Behzod,
like I think it's a good like if you're interested in engaging in that conversation, you're probably my people and we can talk. And if you're like, why do you not have a company listed here? Then like you're not my people.
Behzod, I want to kind of like ask you a question as part of the question that Vivianne like posed to us. I'm curious where the like when the me as a service came to you clearly as like either an offering or just like oh this makes sense for this just makes sense. I'd love to hear that because there's some chatter in the chat about it.
Yeah, I think some of this, and I think we're gonna get into this maybe later, or like honestly, this just feels like such a regular conversation Vivianne and I have. Um, I think for me, a big part of it, the comfort or the like acceptance of it comes from my why. And like I sort of joke that I like doing group projects for a living. Like there is there's nothing that I have where I want to like go make a dent in the universe and be known as the best of a thing. I like don't have this desire to build a massive empire or build a like I really love solving interesting problems with people that I respect. And so I think the first year when I left Slack and went solo, I did like five very different projects in very different directions to kind of test, do I like doing this? Is this lucrative? Does this feel good? And the work has sort of like my work shifted, and I'll drop in a link for my like I write annual reflections, and I think my most recent one has kind of this like layering, but where I got to was like I went from help me do research to like help me do research to do this thing, help me do this thing, and then it just became help me. And like 90+%, I've worked with like 40 some companies in the last 6 years. Over 90% of them are either former colleagues or word of mouth referral. And so there's no thing I sell. It's just me. It's like someone, Vivianne's talking to someone. She's like, you should talk to Behzod. And like that became the thing. And I think that felt like in every situation, I do like kind of reviews after every client project and every speaking engagement and stuff for like, what was I excited about? What was I proud of? What would I do differently, et cetera? And like over time, I realized that I felt more and more permission to just show up and be me. And the things that I loved doing and I was excited about were not things that fit into a box. It was where I leaned into the weird or the unique or the esoteric metaphors or the random example. And like the more I showed up as me, the more excited I was to do the work, and it felt like I was doing better work. And so I've kind of just like looked for more opportunities for like Behzod shaped problems. And to Vincent's point earlier, like that means that I have to come in with so much confidence, not in like a brash, like I'm the best kind of way, but just like I know what I offer, and I know that like I can show up and sort of like do a thing. I think the game's framing is really helpful for me because like I'm not great at any sport. I'm just an athlete. So like I can run, I can move, I can like I will do a thing, and like that's how I kind of want to operate. But it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of conversations with Vivianne, a lot of projects that went well and things that didn't go well, and also just like knowing why I'm doing this.
Yeah, and also it sounds like just being comfortable being multi-passionate and being a Swiss Army knife, right? Like I remember as a kid, my mom like would chastise me for this because I was again multi-passionate all these things. And she would always say, you know, Vivianne, a jack of all trades is a master of none. Like she would just always say that. But she left off the second half of that quote, which I learned like 5 years ago. The full quote is a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. And I think a lot of times our corporate settings want us to be in this tight, cute box. And what I hear from you, Behzod, is you've just accepted that there's depth and breadth to you, and you understand that there's opportunity to engage that in different ways. That's a really healthy relationship with you. Like it's not like it's for me, it's more than confidence. It's like you just have like a healthy relationship and an understanding of yourself.
I think I appreciate that. I think for me the way that I've operationalized this, and like maybe this is something we'll get into in a bit, is like for me success is kind of two things. Like I have money coming in so I can keep playing the game. Like basically I'm not going broke. And the projects that come my way are increasingly interesting and new, and with like they're more and more the right fit. And I think that's been like those like can I keep doing this, and are the things that I'm doing more and more interesting or like exciting to me, and like does that open up new and new opportunities? Like that's kind of my markers for this is working.
One of the things that I would love to add, I really appreciate a lot of what you said, Behzod. I'd also too am one of those people that professes that I work really well in group. I love working really with great intention people. Um, I had this moment where I was looking at the different titles in which I've had, and I it's like some of them when I said it to like regular people outside of design and tech, they were like, "Hmm, okay, that's." They had no idea what that meant, right? And so there was this narrative that or this insight that I gathered, which is that many of these titles and the identity associated with them is a bit arbitrary, and it is something that it is defined outside of the true nature of how I operate. And so what it caused me to do is look at what is the underlying thread of the things that is true about me, no matter what the title is. And so I can decouple the fact that I spent or I'm sort of like grieving the years that I put in, right? Because it wasn't so much about the years that I put in, but it was more so about what I was gaining that attributes and associates to the core of how I operate. And so for me, that became an opportunity for me to define how I move in this world, despite whatever title that I had at a company, and how I align myself with the work that I was doing, the company that I have now. Does it align with this way of being? And so I was able to distill it into 6 words. So I'll read one of them because I have many of these 6 word statements. So this would be like a homework assignment for you. And so for me, a lot of what I do or what I'm doing right now is designing impactful experiences for thoughtful leaders, right? 6 words, right? If you can distill what it is that you have been collecting over the years when it comes to your experiences, it allows for you to more easily hopefully, to release yourself from the idea that you're wasting time by making a decision and moving into something new, right? Because what you're doing is you're actually moving more towards that statement, that way of being, and you're adding more to that in terms of the impact that you will make, and how you will continue to mature and grow in that space. And for me, that was something that I had to do, and I was sort of forced to do it because I had this sort of identity crisis of like, oh my gosh, I put in all of these years and I was known as this kind of designer, and now that I'm pivoting and making this leap, who am I it to people? Who am I to myself? And so it was allowing myself to anchor myself in this statement of like, well, what was the pattern? What was the connective tissue? And that was it. I was always trying to design impactful experiences for thoughtful leaders. And I continue to do that. It just looks very differently.
Yeah. Rachel, I want us you and I to address the grief part of this question. I'll go first and then I'm curious about what you have to say. Because again, one of the things that was coming up a lot was this idea of grieving something that they haven't even lost yet. And I think that mourning a version of yourself in advance is like a legitimate normal thing to do. So I don't want to like minimize that or disregard that. But in terms of the part where people feel like, oh, this wasted years part, I think sometimes grief can do bad math for us. Because nothing that you actually built inside that company belongs to the company. I'm thinking about the skills, the judgment, like the relationships, the things in you that knows when a design is like terrible, right? You carry all of that out the door with you. The logo stays, but you don't, right? So like leaving doesn't waste those years. Leaving is the only way to find out they were really like ever yours to begin with, right? And for me, I always think about how a foundation isn't wasted when you build something new on top of it. So again, if you don't build something new on top of this, yes, wasted. That's like the entire point of a foundation. So maybe if I give a little bit more of a harder version of this, it's that the only way to truly waste those years is to stay somewhere that's quietly eroding you, just so the number stays tidy, the story stays clean, right? Like the fear of wasting it becomes the thing that actually wastes it. Like that's the real trap. Um, and then at that point, you kind of have to sort through this identity question, which is the one that I think kept coming up as well in the survey, which is like, who am I if I'm not X some whatever company? And if I'm going to be blunt, like that status is borrowed, right? X Google, X Microsoft, whatever is collateral, but it's not equity. And so, like the panic you feel at the thought of losing it, that panic is information. And that's like how we need to relate to that and shift that a little differently. It's telling you how much your sense of self you quietly put on loan from a logo or for a brand. And the better that they treated you, the more of yourself you probably handed over without noticing. And we all talk about those gold handcuffs, right? They're not only financial, but gold handcuffs can be identity handcuffs too. Um, and so I guess like I just want to like acknowledge the grief, but also acknowledge that, something that I've learned in my own entrepreneurship journey is that you don't build like a self, you don't build yourself from scratch. Like the self was always there. The company just rented you the storefront and let you forget that like you're you. Like there's so much breadth and depth and expansion to you that could have never been contained within a commitment or an assignment to a logo. But I'm curious, Rachel, especially because of your background as well in social work, how you're thinking about kind of like grief and identity when it comes to shifting and leaving previous careers.
Yeah, like I typed some thoughts as you all were talking here, and like the first thing I typed out was like, nothing was wasted. And then I thought, how kind of like arrogant of me to even say that, because I really feel like it's for me to be able to say like nothing was wasted, that for every like, horrible place that I worked at or difficult boss, bad project or failed project or like organizational harm, like it feels like empty words, but I feel like I'm able to say that with a grounded confidence because I have recovered a bit and I have healed from some of those experiences, you know? And so I do think that there's still some remnants of grief that can be present. It's you know, if you've ever experienced grief, like either the loss of an experience or a situation or something in the workplace, or just like the loss of a loved one, you know, there is this common explanation that, you know, your life grows around that grief. I do think that some of the grief with organizational situations, with work situations, I do think some of that has shrunk, but it hasn't completely gone away. It may at some point. It might. If it does, great. If it doesn't, I'm okay if it doesn't, you know? But you know, something else that I wrote here was like, you know, do I wish I had not had some of those experiences? Like 1,000% yes. Because and the thing that I think I can get caught up on is I think about just the volume of emotional labor that sometimes these types of experiences, whether you're grieving something or this anticipatory loss or this ambiguous loss, it can take up just a lot of real estate in our heads, and not even just in our heads, in our entire body. Um, but something that I also want to note is that I have come to a point in my life and in my practice and in the way that I work that I want to honor those things as those are things that are part of me. That is who I am. That is what I am experiencing. I don't want to self-shame. I don't want to diagnose myself. I don't want to pathologize myself. These are normal human reactions to be feeling these things. And so, yeah, you know, like I said on Wednesday, I mean, there are these, it's very easy and normal for us to grieve like things that we are leaving behind. Like I often think about this, you know, this crew that I worked with at this design center at a university. And my God, we had an amazing team. We just had a horrible boss that pushed 19 of us out in less than 2 years, you know? And I'm still connected with many of those people. I'm greater friends and colleagues with them because we are gone. Now, none of that felt like a possibility 5 years ago. It all felt devastating. But, you know, are there some good things that have flourished outside of that? Yeah. So I feel that continuum of hopefulness, with just an enormous amount of like care and tendering to that, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. I'm seeing all the head nods and all the things in the comments. I want to move us, and I'm trying to like also weave in some of the things that are being submitted, but I do want to touch on a topic that is a little tender, maybe a little bit messier to discuss. And a few people had written that, you know, hey, they grew up poor or working class, and that leaving a stable paycheck feels like betraying everything their family sacrificed for. For anyone here who carries that, I guess, how do you reconcile wanting something different with the weight of what maybe like a stable job means to the people who raised you?
I'll speak to this because it's kind of like I'll speak to this first because it's this is one where I this question comes up often, and I think it can be assumed. There's a lot that we can assume of people if we hear like, oh, like you know, someone worked at Slack or someone worked at Meta or Facebook, and just assumptions of maybe where someone had worked in the past, and maybe also like what people just look like and appear. So I want to give a little bit of some context around, again, some of my social work thinking is around like earned and unearned privileges. And so there are many privileges that I have earned over just countless hours of a lot of overwork and a lot of exhaustion that has led to significant burnout, but has also maybe come out stronger on the other side. But there are certain things that are just born privileges as well. And then mixed in, you know, definitely like the messy mix in all of that is that, you know, I'm going to speak like real, just like clearly on this, because I probably haven't really just been explicit at different times when this question has come up. But I grew up in Danville, Illinois, a like working class like city that has had significant population decline, is often on like those like 100 worst cities in the US. It's almost always in like the top 10 of like worst cities at this point. Very blue collar working class. Our family grew up working class, what I never understood when I was a kid, but what would be identified as like working class poor. And that for me, growing up in like the 70s and 80s, was power was always shut off in the wintertime. So there would be multiple days over the course of a central Illinois winter where the power was not on. We're using kerosene heaters to try to like heat up a home. I mean, just like, I don't know how we survived, to be quite literally how we survived. Government cheese, it's like, so if anyone in here who like has ever had like government cheese, that's a whole other like identity that's kind of like added to your like experience of growing up like poor or working class poor in significant poverty. One income family. My parents were married, but they fought constantly, so there was just constant stress on the family system. I was a kid during like the Ronald Reagan years, which we're clearly seeing how well that is serving all of us now in present day. And so like so much of that experience has had like significant impact on how I think about work, how I think about my own worth, my own value. At the same time, there's also, my parents were very creative. Like they cared about the arts. Music was a massive thing in our world. Art was taken seriously. And so like this combination of these two things like really just has like it fueled how I think about how to like price things, and like how do I want to like survive or not replicate some of those experiences in my own family, my own little family, like present day. But I think talking openly about some of those experiences, again, where it feels safe and safe enough to talk about those things with people who you feel safe enough about talking about those things with, has made me comfortable enough to even like share that like just now. But a lot of people don't know that about me. They assume like, oh, like she worked at the White House, which, I mean, I was the first and only social worker to ever work at the White House with US Digital Service. And I was also the last, and so like those experiences can sound so magnificent and also be such a burden and a weight because of part of our life experiences.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing, and I was seeing like a lot of head nods, a lot of love in the chat. And I think a part of it is just remembering that like we all bring our context and stories into the things that we're building. I think for me, and again, you've heard me say over and over again, I do have a very deep conviction that entrepreneurship can and should be a healing experience. And for me, part of entrepreneurship was breaking some generational chains. There have been some things that have been passed down to us in terms of fear and anxiety, how we relate to things. And is it always fun being the chosen one to like be the one that's breaking these generational chains? Absolutely not. But for me, again, little context, like my mom is half Korean, half Jamaican, grew up in South Korea, came to the States when she was really young. So I get the best of both worlds of having a black mama and like an Asian immigrant parent, which meant I didn't get beatings as a kid. I had to do book reports and papers. I was grounded all the time, all these things, right? So like that's like my upbringing, but also like many of you, as I'm assuming, growing up in a home with emotionally unavailable parents, emotionally immature parents, meant that I had a really hard time articulating what do I want and what do I need. Corporate just poured gas on that and made that even harder to untangle. It also meant that I was raised with just like a sense of like scarcity's everywhere around us all the time. I don't know if any of you relate to this, but my parents would buy milk on sale, freeze it, And then we would like thaw it out. Oh my gosh. Anyone or freeze bread because it was all on sale, all those things. So, that was like a lot of my upbringing. And when I started the frozen milk, we don't have time to get into that. And as I started to, create my career in corporate and eventually like build my own business, I had to have a lot of hard conversations with my family. My family, again, they're doing the best from like where they're at. And even though it's not the greatest, even though it's definitely not the healthiest, like I do recognize that, but I also had to put some boundaries between myself and them. My parents, especially my mom, was very like always reminding me of like the fear of why something won't work out. And when something did work out, she always diminished it as like, well, yeah, like of course you should be doing that. Classic Asian immigrant parent. So I had to recognize that like just my parents are people. And I had to kind of like take a step back and understand like their own trauma, undealt with trauma and issues, and how it doesn't have to be my story. That chains can be broken, and it's led to some very difficult conversations. And I've had to be in therapy. Shout out to my therapist. Like if I could tip her, I would. And she's helped me to be and feel more free in more ways that I even could imagine. But entrepreneurship really agitated a lot of those things. And a lot of it was choosing me, despite what I felt like my family or my parents wanted. It's not easy. There's not going to be an easy, clean answer to this conversation. But I'm so thankful for the ways that I've learned to just like trust my gut again, to learn how to articulate what do I need and want. Doesn't only impact like business, impacts my relationship with my partner. There's a lot of like trickle down that goes into that. And so I would say for those of you who are kind of grappling with some of the generational things here, my encouragement and reminder, and again, like it's a process in anything, but to remember that like we don't have to inherit like our parents' stories and their trauma. Like we can be this kind of like generational breaking point. There can be something different. And hopefully by them witnessing us, maybe they can experience some healing as well. So that's like my take on it and how I've had to work through it. We don't have time to get into all the nitty gritty, but that's the TLDR.
I love your transparency, both Rachel and Vivianne. I was checking in the chat and noticed that someone mentioned about the first generation college student that also being a pressure, and I am one of them as well. So I've definitely felt that that pressure, right? And I in my experience, I resonate with a lot of what you said, Vivianne, and you as well, Rachel. So I don't want to re-say a lot of what you said, but what I would offer is that one of the things that I started to look at when I was feeling the pressure for myself, and having immigrant parents and being in a household that was both joyous at times and also really contentious at other times, right? Was recognizing that as I got older, I started to see, Vivian, as you mentioned, started to see my parents specifically as individuals, right? Because when you're younger, they're who they are, right? In terms of how you might see them, and seeing them as individuals, and started to look at the attributes in which they were displaying during the times in which we were growing up. Which for me, there was a level of boldness. For my father, who he came to the U.S. to go to aviation school, which he actually was able to get his pilot license before he got his driver's license. So there was an immense pressure in terms of, for him, coming out here to pursue this dream that he had, which got diverted because I was on the way, essentially. So my mom was pregnant with me during the time that he was pursuing, this dream of his, and so he had to shift gears to continue to take care of the family. And then my mother, coming to the U.S. to follow my father, and so the sacrifice that they made to come to the U.S. from the British Virgin Islands. So both of my parents are from Tortola, which is in the Caribbean, if you've ever heard of it. And so they came here for that sacrifice. And so instead of me looking at it from the lens of, oh my gosh, I have to live up to what they're expecting of me. I looked at it from, oh my goodness, these people are bold and they're courageous. And how can I move in that way, right? So that boldness and that courageous may go against what they may have expected from me, right? And so that's how I started to use and see the environment that I was exposed to. My mother was fearless in terms of what she had to, do in terms of, supporting for her family and standing up for herself and for her family, and that also being something that I take with me, where as I am standing up for myself and as I'm building my company, as I am reaching out to investors, that for myself, I am bold enough to articulate what it is that I want and I need, because I have that example, right? And so I think for me, it was a shift in the lens in which I saw the experiences that I had in my family dynamic, and looking at it less of pressure and more of what were the examples and the attributes that I can then take with me as I move through this unknown space in these spaces, and then being able to demonstrate that back to them. And it unlocks for them some opportunities for them to even see what is possible, even at this stage in their life, because they're both living, and they're both reevaluating, and not even readjusting who they are, right, in this stage in their life, by way of me showing up in the way that I have.
I love how each of you have talked about like seeing parents as people, and like I think this goes back to some of the, we're all talking about going on this journey on our own, but there's also other people in our lives that are going on this journey at different paces and from different orientations. And I think like recognizing how people in your life see this journey or what that perspective is shapes how you can have those conversations with them. Like I feel like I've grown up with a very split version of this where like my mom grew up in America, like pretty poor, sort of got herself out of that. My dad's from Iran, came over here in the middle of the war or like right before the war. They've had very different experiences where like my mom grew up knowing scarcity and like bringing that with her. And my dad basically was kind of just like, I have to figure it out. And like, you do the best you can with what you have. And even when I went solo, the conversations between the two of them were very different. My mom always wanted to know like, okay, you said you put aside money, like how much runway do you have? And like, are things okay? And my dad was the flip side of like, are you doing projects you're excited about? What else is on the horizon? And like, it created this very interesting dynamic where they both kind of were advocating for me at different times and challenging me at different times. But it was really helpful to have that contrast because it made me realize that like they weren't just my parents. There was like a mother who was very worried about her son because she grew up like not knowing if money was coming in, and a father being like, are you looking like seriously at some of these opportunities and being thoughtful, or are you just like coasting and sort of believing that everything's going to be okay? And those were just like very different conversations that I was regularly having, and then having to confront that with myself, with friends, etc. Doesn't necessarily make it easier, but at least when you understand that these people are human and they care about you, like you can have the conversations that need to be had, up until a point where you realize that maybe that's, their fears don't have to be your fears.
Rachel, I feel like you're pondering over there.
Vivianne always calls me in on the pondering. This is why you are one of the main reasons why I always like have I've got to be able to see my own face, because I spent years thinking I had a poker face, and someone said, "Oh, Rachel, you do not have a poker face." And so I was like, I always need to see what I'm looking like. I think I'm really just like squinting so I can type, like I'm at that age. I've revealed that I'm Gen X. But I think the thing that just hearing each of us talk about, growing up and our upbringing, like family systems, our parents. I mean, it just made me think about also, and I typed it in the chat, just like the other people who might not be biological family that can really also give us a view into ourselves. So I think back on meeting this woman who was a librarian when I was in my grade school, and I had a lot of like admiration and respect for her. I was a very, very shy kid, and I loved going to the library at the school. And then fast forward years later, and I sort of like re-meet her in this other like just environment and university world. And she said, I remember you, Rachael. And like, and I could feel like that comment when she said it. And she shared just different random third grade things that I must have said. And I thought, wow, if I wonder what it was a very like Mr. Rogers moment, Vivianne. And I think there are people, other people in our lives who can also have these really significant impacts, and to hold on to those dearly too. Yeah. And Vivianne and I, like, we love Mr. Rogers. We are talking about Mr. Rogers, like kind of like all the time. I mean, I have this on my desk and I just got to show it because I'm mentioning it. This little like Mr. Rogers, like, thing that he says things.
Yo, well, I think especially like, I think Rachel and I talk a lot about Mr. Rogers when like the world feels especially dark and we're like, man, Mr. Rogers was just the light we did not
Yeah.
deserve. So yeah, that's the inside joke there. I do want to transition us a little bit. I'm gonna do, how much time do we have here? All right, let me do this. There are a bunch of questions that we didn't get to today, but I will find a way to answer them. Maybe I'll do I've done podcast episodes with all three of these folks, so maybe we'll do another one. Maybe we'll host another panel for us to, spill tea and talk about all the things. But I guess I'm curious, especially like for those who are either they're picturing freedom on the other side, they're thinking about how do I leave corporate, how do I handle like all of these things that are coming up. I'm wondering maybe like what is something that you would say to the person who right now maybe they're feeling terrified, they're feeling stuck, they're wondering whether wanting out makes sense, if they should do it. I guess, yeah, what's a piece of encouragement or advice that you'd want to share with folks?
My advice would probably be something I kind of said earlier, but like I would spend time getting clarity on what you want to run toward. And the way that I would do that really practically is like think about your current job, think about the current ways you spend your time. What are things that you do that nourish you? Then I would think about what are the things that you do that are like that you feel like you're good at, and then what are the things that of that you feel like people would pay you for, or there is like an economic opportunity or configuration for. And I think most interesting businesses are at the intersection of those things, at least a sustainable business. I have one friend who just like grew up in an industry that he doesn't love, but he really gets, and he found a way to like basically create an opportunity to like be a part of that industry on his terms that like no one, it's not a job that would have existed. It's not like like no one, he basically works with supply chain, like, what do they call it? Like supplement, yeah, material companies, like people who deal with like, coffee or whatever. Like, and he like optimizes their overall warehouse processes. Like that's not a job, but it's just like he spent so much time growing up around those things that he was like, this could be better, this could be better, this could be better. And he loves working with people. He loves rolling his sleeves up. And so he just goes around like making warehouses more efficient. And that was like an exercise of like, I like doing these things, I'm good at these things, and people will pay me for this. And I think spending time figuring those things out can help move you from a place of uncertainty or like at least reduce the uncertainty and then help you better evaluate those risks.
Um, I had something written to share, and then as I'm listening to being sensitive to the moment and recognizing that it's important. Something that we echoed earlier is this freedom. And you articulated so well, Vivianne, earlier about having this freedom and referencing the movies. And I think that there's a significant amount of power in the ability to have the freedom of choice that we give ourselves, right? And for me, I'll wrap it in a story. So when living here in Hawaii, there's oftentimes those who are not born and raised here, there are categories of people who are here. There are retirees, military, and those who are transplants. They're coming back here, back home, right? And I don't fit in any of those. So when I share that I am, that I moved here, oftentimes I'm either hit with are you military? And it's like, no, I'm not military. Or are you coming back here because you have family? It's like, no. And so it just kind of leaves this open space, like, why else in the world? How are you here? And when I think about this question, and I think about this experience, and that is because I had the freedom to choose to be here, because I made the choice to bet on myself, right? And so it opened up this doorway of making more choices that allows for me the opportunity to choose a life that I can be proud of and that I can be excited about, right? And that came with the muscle of making these choices, of deciding I'm going to leave because I want to explore the possibilities of this new opportunity, which allowed me to, make the choice that my wife and I said we want to live in Hawaii because that's the life that we want to have for ourselves and our future family. And so that comes with the ability to be able to start making choices in that direction where you actually are putting yourself first, and being bold about how you want to continue to show up in the world via the work that you do, right? And for me, being here and being in a position where I'm building this company, it came from the ability to make the choice to continue to walk in that mission sort of statement that I shared with you earlier, which it was outside of titles, and it was always aligned to, am I being able to design impactful experiences for thoughtful leaders, and what does that look like, and how can I continue to make choices and decisions that allow me the freedom to walk in that, however it decides to show up. Hopefully that.
Yeah. Rachel?
I'll share and I'll put this in the chat. This came up as part of the workshops from yesterday and on Wednesday around these exercises, these reflective practices of mapping your field of care. And one of those things was coming up with a practice statement. The other piece was like sort of imagining or dreaming this like future role. And so in an example, I shared the story a little bit on Wednesday, and then I shared the story and the link yesterday. So I'll put this in the chat, but I do think there's some value in really crafting like one of many of your dream roles. And the reason why I crafted this one role in the link that I shared, it's also been shared in the resources from like Wednesday and yesterday, is that I just kept seeing job descriptions that sometimes they're missing all the elements that I wish had existed. And so I wasn't even necessarily looking for a job for myself, but I've got a lot of people who will sometimes say like, hey, Rachel, if you hear of something, will you let me know? So I just sort of naturally scan a lot of different like job postings and try to share different things with different folks at different times. And then I would sometimes see jobs where like it would be coming from an organization or a company where they would mention like trauma-informed design, and I would get kind of excited, but then I was hearing these horror stories from people on the inside, and I was like I feel like they're like people are getting now they're starting to like say the language, but then they aren't really like embodying and living that out.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I want to see what this looks like if I built it myself, and like what would a version of this that maybe mimics some of these elements of what we often see out there, what would that look and feel like? And I shared as part of this story that I felt bad about putting this out there in the world, and then I had about 20 people like refer me back to this job and saying like, oh my God, Rachel, this job sounds perfect for you. Like you should apply for this. And I had to come clean and say like, it doesn't exist. I made it up. So you see that caveat that it's at the bottom of that doc. But there's the helpful, encouraging like exercise of this is that it really helped me get clear on what are some of those things that I want in a client and or
Mhm.
if I ever do like a part-time job, or if I ever do go on to work with someone in a full-time capacity again, what are some of those conditions that I'm not going to be wavering on? So there's value to these types of exercises for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And I think also too, if there's like a through line, it's like give yourself space to think and dream a bit. Um, and then see like, all right, how can I make this possible? Like clarity comes through doing. And I think a lot of times we think clarity and that confidence will just hit you, but it comes from reps, it comes from engagement. So I think the three things y'all said are great. The only thing I would add to it is I think when it comes to these moments in life, a lot of times we can treat it as a solo journey, but it's better as a shared one. So find community, be able to not like keep it to yourself. Someone who can speak encouragement and life into the vision and dreams that you have. And someone who can like pull you out when you're struggling. Like me and my best friend, we have a rule where if one of us is struggling, we'll send the other the like lifesaver emoji. And if the person is available, they'll be like, hey, what's going on? You know, do you want to talk about it? And if the person is also struggling, they'll just send it back. So at least we know we're in solidarity of like we're on the struggle bus together. But just having that like relationship has been so helpful and huge. So yeah, don't treat it as a solo journey, treat it as a shared one, and clarity comes through doing. But yeah, well, can we just show some love to Behzod, Vincent, Rachel? Yo, like thank y'all so much. And for being willing to talk shop with us, spill tea, break bread, all the things. Like thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, folks, for the questions that we didn't get to, I will find a way. Don't worry, I got you. But again, thank you, Rachel, Behzod, and Vincent. I appreciate you so much, and I'm seeing all the love come in for the chat. Thanks for hanging out with us and diving into some of these real and unfiltered conversations. We know your time is valuable, and so we don't take it for granted. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, or gave you something new to consider, we'd love for you to hit that follow button on whatever streaming service you're using. That way, you'll never miss an episode when we drop them. And if you want to go even deeper, sign up for our newsletter at choosecourageinc.com, and you'll get updates on new episodes, access to exclusive freebies, and first dibs on coaching opportunities and other resources to help you make bold moves in your life and business. So we appreciate you, we see you, and we're rooting for you. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and a friendly reminder to drink some water.